as you know, the first GOP presidential debate is less than a week away. How important is it that you qualify for the debate to get on stage, and how confident are you that you're going to make it?
I'm real confident that we're going to be able to hit the requirements in order to be on the debate stage. I'm looking forward to being able to articulate my vision to many folks that may not know who I am. You know, I always say I recognize I'm a dark horse candidate, and this is an opportunity to get that message out.
You have said that you would not sign the pledge to support the nominee if it's former President Donald Trump. Right. And so I'm wondering, wouldn't that keep you off the stage regardless?
Well, there's a lot is going to happen within these next couple of days before the debate. Donald Trump has even said he's not signing the debate pledge, and Donald Trump is talking about not showing up to the debate. And so first step for me is to meet the unique donor threshold and the polling requirements, and we're confident we're going to be able to achieve both of those things, and then we'll have the conversations necessary about the debate pledge. And I've made it very clear. My issue is not with not supporting the Republican nominee. It's that I won't support Donald Trump. And, I think Donald Trump is running for president, not to make America great again, but in order to stay out of prison. And if we nominate Donald Trump as the GOP nominee, then we're giving 4 more years to Joe Biden.
And so that's your issue. You think that he can't win. And so I'm wondering then, because you've been very openly critical of the former president, how does that help your campaign and win the nomination? Well,
ultimately, and look, I recognize that Donald Trump is the presumptive frontrunner and that his numbers and his polling he's polling in first position. But we've learned that going back to 2016 that polls are only a snapshot in time. National polls are different than state polls, and the election is 25 weeks away. If we would have listened to polling in 2022, everybody would have thought that there was going to be a red wave and Kevin McCarthy was going to have a 40-plus majority in the House of Representatives. It didn't end up that way. It ended up with 5. All the polls had always suggested that a black Republican wasn't going to be able to win in a 72% Latino district in South and West Texas. We were able to always change that narrative. And so ultimately, my issue is the GOP and Republicans, we have a real opportunity in November where independents and conservative Democrats are sick and tired of the direction that the Democratic Party is going. They don't want to see 4 more years of Joe Biden, but we have to elect someone that can grow the GOP brand with independents and folks in the Democratic Party. And the reason that the Republicans haven't won a national election in 20 years is because we continue to preach just to the choir. We got to grow the choir. I have experience in doing that. That's how I consistently won in South and West Texas, and that's the opportunity in this election as well.
You're talking about the popular vote.
That's correct.
And so I wanted to ask, what is the basis for your campaign? What is your rationale for running, and why do you believe you are the best Republican in the race?
Sure. Look, we are faced with really complicated times, and we need common sense. We're facing a number of generational defining challenges, whether it's the Chinese Communist Party trying to surpass the United States of America as the global superpower, or the fact that we have technologies like artificial intelligence that are going to upend every single industry, not in 10 years, but in 2 or 3 years, or our kids have the worst scores in math, science, and reading in this century. These are all tectonic challenges that we need to address, and I haven't been seeing people address this. And then I have a unique background of being on the front lines of the global war on terrorism. I'm the only person in this race that has been willing to put his life on the line for what I believe in and to protect my country. I'm the only person in this race that understands these technologies, that have been involved in cutting edge technologies like artificial intelligence. And then I have the background experience of my time representing Texas in Washington, D.C., dealing with every federal issue potentially imaginable. So that suite of issues, and I know how to win tough elections. There's only a handful of us in this race that has had tens of millions of dollars of negative advertising dropped on their heads by Democrats. I was the #1 target of Nancy Pelosi, and we consistently won. So I know how to win, and I know how to grow a coalition by doing things that most people don't expect. Show up to places where people haven't seen you and talk about the issues that they care about.
So if you're elected, what would your top priorities be? I know you mentioned some issues, but what would your top priorities be if elected?
So top priority for most Americans is jobs in the economy. People are worried about being able to put food on their table, a roof over their head, and take care of the people that they love and make sure that they're healthy and safe. And that starts with fiscal policy. And the United States government shouldn't spend more money than it makes. One of the reasons you have that is because you don't have multi-year budgets and multi-year appropriations. I want to be able to change that because that's how we're able to start addressing the federal deficit. And when you start doing that, you can start addressing the national debt. When it comes to foreign policy, the biggest existential threat to the United States is the Chinese government. The fact that they're growing their footprint in a place like Cuba, they have hypersonic missiles. The fact that they can be able to hit Miami in less than 4 minutes or get a hypersonic missile to Washington, D.C. in under 14 minutes, that's a problem. They're trying to prevent the dollar from being the currency of the world, and they're trying to become a leader in a number of technologies that are going to be the future of all commerce. And so that is an existential threat from a military perspective, from a diplomacy perspective, from an intelligence perspective, and from an economy perspective. And then three, something that we have to deal here in Texas way too much, the border. There's a humanitarian crisis at the border that started with Donald Trump, continued and got significantly worse under Joe Biden, and being able to address that is something that would have to be done in those first days of office.
So let's take those issues. Inflation is a big part of what we're seeing. It's eased from last year, obviously, but what would your solution be?
Well, the broader issue is not necessarily where inflation is today. It's that since the beginning of this century, cost of goods and services have increased 3 times as much as the average salary. And so the fact that even with the changes of inflation that we're seeing over the last couple of weeks and months, that so many Americans still feel like they can't get by, that still are concerned about the direction of the economy. That goes back to addressing fiscal policy and how the government collects money and spends money. We have to pay down our national debt. We have to address the root drivers of that. And then we have to have an efficient government. And one of the things that we should be doing is using some of these new tools like AI to provide better citizen-facing services. Why does a veteran have to wait months to get an appointment at the VA? It should be done in minutes. Why does an American have to wait months to get their passport renewed? They should be able to do it in minutes. These are all efficiencies that will improve how the government operates.
And I wanted to ask you about China. How do you keep them in check?
Yeah. The only way we keep China in check is make sure we have a bigger posse, right? That means our allies in Europe, in the Far East, and even in Latin America. The thing that I've learned being connected with to national security for my entire adult life is your friends should love you and your enemies should fear you. And so when China violates a provision that they agreed to in the World Trade Organization, we have to have a coalition of countries that administer consequences to that. We also need to make sure that the federal government and the private sector is working closely when it comes to new technologies, whether it's artificial intelligence, quantum computing, synthetic biology. But today, we can program DNA the way we program computer code, right? This is wild. It's going to lead to breakthroughs in medicine, but it also can be taken advantage of. And so we need that cooperation from federal research and the private sector to make sure that American companies are the one that are on the cutting edge of these new technologies. That's going to be the battlefield of the future.
And the border. How do you solve that as an issue?
Look, this is an issue I've dealt with my entire time in Congress. I represented 820 miles of the border. It starts with stop treating everybody who's coming into our country illegally as an asylum seeker. Asylum is real. Asylum is something that is needed. But when people abuse the asylum process, it hurts the people that need asylum. This is a policy that began under Donald Trump and continued significantly under Joe Biden. 5.5 million people have come into this country, more than 5.5 million people have come into this country under Joe Biden. And that means each one of these people used a human smuggler, paid about $10,000. So human smugglers are making about $55 billion. That's with the B. To give some context to that number, the entire U.S. intelligence budget is $60 billion. So we need to be treating human smugglers and drug trafficking organizations as terrorist groups. I know a little something about that, having spent a decade in the CIA fighting terrorists. We need to be using all of our intelligence resources to address and dismantle the infrastructure of these groups. We need to be working with our partners in Central and South America to dismantle these groups. And we also need to be treating fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. We do not allow precursor elements to a dirty bomb to come to the United States. So why are we letting a poison that has killed 109,000 Americans last year to come into the country? Stop those things.
And what would that mean, though?
It's the tools that the U.S. government used to track some of these elements that are not being used now to address that issue. It would be having other agencies be focused on collecting intelligence and stopping this from happening. Right now, when it comes to things like fentanyl and human smuggling, you really only have DEA and the Homeland Security investigations involved in tracking this. These are not entities that are designed to create intelligence operations, to dismantle intelligence operations, and that's ultimately what we need to do, whether it comes for the people that are doing it or the product that they're moving in. And the other element that we need to be doing in when it comes to border security is we need to be making sure that we align our foreign aid in places like the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras to address root causes in those countries that are causing people to want to come to the United States illegally. There's not always alignment between State Department and USAID and the other entities that use foreign aid, or with the philanthropic community that are doing projects there. So we should have a regional-based approach. We should have a long-term based approach, because it's a fraction of the cost to solve the problem there before it gets to our shores. And then the last point on this, let's streamline legal immigration. If Texas needs more hospitality workers, or Florida needs agriculture workers, or Massachusetts needs people to drive school buses because Americans aren't doing those jobs, let's streamline legal immigration to get people here legally, paying in the taxes, paying for their visas to come here and not giving that money to human smugglers. These are the steps that Republicans and Democrats, voters, agree should happen. The legislation on how to do all this stuff exists, because I wrote it when I was in Congress. And we need someone to address this problem who understands the problem and who's not just interested in talking tough.
Two other questions, and I appreciate your time. And that is just going back to the polls. You talked before about former President Trump being the presumptive front runner. How do you explain that, given all of what's out there as far as indictments, et cetera? His support has either stayed steady or it's gone up, really, since. So how do you explain that?
Well, you explain it because his supporters are going to support him, period. This time in 2015, less than a year before the 2016 election, Donald Trump was only polling at 1%, right? And everybody thought it was going to be Jeb Bush who was going to be the nominee. And things changed pretty drastically. And so the people that could support Donald Trump are going to support Donald Trump. But all of these indictments and this baggage, when it comes to independents and Democrats who are frustrated with the party, that voted for Joe Biden in 2020, are they going to change their vote for Donald Trump if he's the nominee in 2024? The answer is no, and we're going to see a continued defeat of the Republican Party at the national level. And so when you look at folks that, even people that voted for Donald Trump twice and like Donald Trump, they recognize that this is too much baggage. The legal cost alone, $3 out of $4 that Donald Trump raises, whether it's through his campaign or his super PAC, is going to paying his legal fees, and it's only increased because of the cases and the number of people involved in the case in Georgia. And so this is going to ultimately be a distraction to Donald Trump. But again, when we get closer to an election, things always tighten. I was in New Hampshire a couple weekends ago, block walking, I was knocking on doors, and somebody asked me, is Donald Trump running for re-election. Somebody else asked me, I was telling some story, I said something about Ron DeSantis, and someone was like, who is Ron DeSantis? Not everybody is doom scrolling on social media or consuming political news all the time. And that's where the real opportunity is, and those are the folks that we're looking to talk to.
And my last question to you is, there's a convention, national convention in Dallas right now and this weekend of young Republicans. And they've got about 800 to 1,000 people, I'm told, who are attending. What is your message to them?
My message to them is that if we want to continue to ensure this experiment called America works for another 247 years, then we have to make sure we get involved, because democracy is fragile. It always has been fragile. It always will be fragile. And what we have to do pales in comparison to what our forebears had to do. We're not having to fight in the fields of Lexington. We're not fighting on the plains of Gettysburg. We're not having to march in Selma or fight in hand-to-hand combat in the mountains of Mazar-e Sharif. What it requires for us is to get engaged and vote, not just in general elections, but in primaries. And that this experiment is going to work if we make sure that we have people that care about personal responsibility, that care about their fellow brother and sister, and that recognizes our neighbors are not our enemy. They're our fellow American that we happen to disagree with, and way more unites us as a country and divides us. And when we recognize that, we can be better together.
Republican presidential candidate and former Texas Congressman Will Hurd, thank you so much. We appreciate it.